Picture this, there's a room full of leaders, diplomats, reporters, people who have heard speeches all their lives, people who think they know what's coming next. And then Jaishankar opens his mouth, and the entire atmosphere shifts. Because when a man who has been measured, calculated, and silent for long enough finally speaks, his words don't come out light. They come out like thunder. That's the power of breaking silence with authority. See, silence can feel like weakness to some. But when used correctly, silence builds suspense. It builds tension. It builds power. And when that silence is finally broken, the words don't just inform, they transform. They cut through the noise and make everyone lean in. That's exactly what happened. He didn't whisper. He didn't negotiate with truth. He declared it. And in that declaration, the world understood this wasn't business as usual. This was a moment where power wasn't spoken about. It was demonstrated in the very sound of his voice. And here's what really shook the United States. It wasn't just the content of what Jaishankar said. It was the shockwave of how he said it. You see, powerful nations are used to hearing echoes of their own voice. They're used to people nodding in agreement, tailoring their words to fit American approval. But this time was different. This time the words didn't bend, they didn't bow. They didn't carry the tone of someone seeking permission. They carried the weight of someone who knew exactly who he was representing and exactly what he stood for. That's what stuns the powerful. When they expect negotiation, but instead they get declaration. When they expect compromise, but instead they get conviction. And in that moment, the silence in the room wasn't weakness. It was awe, because truth delivered with certainty has a way of stopping even giants in their tracks. For years, India played the game the way the world expected, constantly explaining, constantly justifying, constantly defending its choices. But when Jaishankar spoke, something shifted. That was not the voice of defense, that was the voice of offense. It was no longer about proving why India belonged at the table. It was about declaring that the table doesn't even exist without India. And that's what real transformation looks like. When you stop waiting for validation, when you stop reacting to someone else's narrative, and you start writing your own. That's why his words hit with such force, because they weren't reactive. They were proactive. They weren't asking for recognition. They were commanding respect. And that's the moment the world realized India isn't in the background anymore. It's on the front line, setting the pace. And the reason those words carried such weight is because they weren't wrapped in apologies. They weren't watered down to make others comfortable. They were raw, they were real, they were unapologetic truth. That's what makes truth powerful. When you speak it without flinching, without softening the edges, without waiting to see who claps. Because truth doesn't need decoration. Truth doesn't need permission. Truth stands on its own. And when Jaishankar released that truth, it didn't just inform the world, it exposed the imbalance. It forced even the most powerful to recognize that authority isn't measured by who has the loudest army or the biggest economy, but by who has the courage to stand in conviction without fear. That's why his words didn't just land, they pierced. And here's the part most people miss. You don't rise to greatness by begging for somebody else's applause. You rise when you know exactly who you are, with or without the crowd. Jaishankar didn't pause to see if anyone would nod in agreement. He didn't search the room for approval, because identity is stronger than validation. When you know your assignment, when you know your worth, when you know the power of the nation or the purpose you represent, you don't need anyone to co-sign it. That's the difference between someone speaking to impress and someone speaking from conviction. One chases recognition, the other commands respect. And that's what stunned the world. India was no longer presenting a case. It was presenting itself. And that's the essence of leadership. Real leaders don't sit around waiting for the green light from someone else. Real leaders are the green light. They move, and the world has no choice but to adjust. That's exactly what Jaishankar embodied in that moment. He wasn't measuring his words against what might offend or what might please. He was setting a new standard of how his nation would be addressed, how it would be perceived, how it would be respected. That's the mark of true authority. You don't enter the room asking, "Am I allowed to say this?" You enter the room declaring, "This is how it is." And when that kind of leadership shows up, cards, and when that realize the ENERG, why is GAMER, EDIRECTED change? Imagine for a moment how often this plays out in your own life. How many times have you felt the fire burning inside, ready to say something, ready to stand for something, but you swallowed it down because you feared the reaction of people who looked powerful in the room? That's the trap most of us fall into. We silence ourselves not because we're wrong, not because our voice doesn't matter, but because somewhere deep down we've been conditioned to believe that other people's approval is the measuring stick of our worth. And that's exactly why Jaishankar's stand is so powerful. It's not just a political move, it's a life lesson. He reminded the world that silence is not always humility. Sometimes silence is bondage. And the moment you decide to break that silence, the moment you decide to step out of that prison of fear, you begin to operate at a whole new level. You've got to understand something. When you hold back your truth, when you shrink your voice, you're not protecting yourself. You're robbing the world of the assignment that was placed inside of you. The very thing you think will keep the peace is the same thing that keeps you stuck. And here's the reality. People don't respect silence when it comes from fear. They only respect strength when it comes from conviction. Jaishankar could have played safe. He could have said what everyone expected. He could have walked the middle line. But he didn't. He chose to put identity above approval, conviction above comfort, destiny above diplomacy. And that's why the world stopped to listen. Now let me bring this closer to you. Every single person has moments where life tests whether you'll stay silent or whether you'll speak. Maybe it's at work when your ideas are pushed aside. Maybe it's in your family when your dreams are laughed at. Maybe it's in your own head when fear whispers that you're not enough. And in all those moments, you've got a choice. You can keep quiet, blend in and live small, or you can step up, open your mouth, and let the authority of your truth fill the room. And here's the secret. When you do, it won't just surprise people. It will shift how they see you forever. Think about this. Why did Jaishankar's words shake the room? Because no one expected him to carry that much authority in his voice. They underestimated him. They thought he would play the role the way it's always been played: quiet, agreeable, predictable. But instead, he turned the script upside down, and that's the same reason your silence keeps some people comfortable. They've gotten used to you being quiet. They've gotten used to you not challenging the narrative. But when you finally break that silence, when you finally stand tall, they won't just hear you, they'll feel you. And the shock won't come because your truth changed. The shock will come because you finally dared to let it out. Let me tell you why this matters. Every destiny is tied to a voice. Your success, your influence, your legacy, it's all connected to whether or not you're willing to speak what's inside of you. And here's the trick of fear. It convinces you that silence is safety, but silence is not safety. Silence is surrender. Silence is saying, I'll let the world tell me who I am instead of declaring it myself. That's not humility. That's forfeiting your birthright. And when you live like that, you end up playing a supporting role in someone else's story instead of being the main character in the story you were created to tell. That's why this moment matters so much, because if a man can stand in front of world powers and refuse to bow, what excuse do you have to keep quiet in front of the opinions of a few people? If he can risk the reaction of nations, why can't you risk the reaction of your coworkers, your friends, even your critics? You see, fear magnifies consequences that aren't even real. You think, if I speak, I might lose this opportunity. If I speak, I might offend someone. If I speak, they might not like me. But let me ask you, what's the greater loss, their temporary approval or your permanent destiny? What's more costly, the momentary discomfort of being misunderstood or the lifelong regret of never being heard? Let's get practical. Every major change in history happened because someone broke the silence. Nations were freed because someone broke the silence. Revolutions started because someone broke the silence. Movements rose because someone broke the silence. And yet here you are, silencing yourself over the fear of rejection from people who don't even determine your future. That's the deception of silence. It makes you believe the people holding you back have the power to define your outcome. But here's the truth, they don't. They never did. And the moment you see that, you realize that your silence wasn't protecting you, it was caging you. So let me speak to you directly. When are you going to stop silencing yourself? When are you going to stop editing your dream to make it digestible for people who don't even believe in you? When are you going to stop shrinking your vision to fit the comfort zone of those too afraid to step into their own? The world doesn't need another echo. The world doesn't need another copy. The world needs your voice, your truth, your conviction. And the longer you stay silent, the longer you delay not just your destiny, but the lives you were meant to impact. That's the very reason Jaishankar's words were unforgettable. They weren't carefully crafted to please. They weren't manipulated to charm. They were bold, unfiltered, and anchored in truth. And that's what gave them power. You don't remember people who play it safe. You remember people who take a stand. You don't follow people who whisper for approval. You follow people who roar with conviction. And you've got that same roar inside of you. But as long as you silence it, nobody will ever hear it. And let me warn you, if you don't break your silence, someone else will gladly speak on your behalf. And when they do, they won't speak your truth. They'll speak their version of it. That's why the silence of the good becomes the weapon of the manipulative. That's why the silence of the strong becomes the playground of the weak. And that's why you can't afford to hold back anymore. Because your silence is not neutral, it's costly. It costs you influence. It costs you opportunities. It costs you the respect you've been waiting for. So, take the lesson. Jaishankar didn't break silence just for himself. He broke it for a nation. And when you break yours, it won't just be for you either. It will be for your family, your community, your generation. Because every time you decide to speak, you give someone else permission to speak. Every time you stand in your truth, you light a fire in someone else who's been hiding in fear. And that's the real power. You don't just liberate yourself, you liberate others. Now ask yourself this: how much longer are you willing to live beneath your calling? How much longer are you willing to let fear write your script? How much longer are you going to let silence keep you bound? Because the truth is, the moment you decide to break it, everything changes. Your presence changes, your confidence changes, your opportunities change. The world around you changes not because they gave you permission, but because you claimed your authority. That's exactly what Jaishankar did on that stage. He didn't wait for history to recognize him. He created history by daring to speak when silence was expected. And in the same way, your breakthrough won't come from waiting, it will come from breaking. The breaking of silence, the breaking of fear, the breaking of limitation. That's when your voice will carry. That's when your authority will rise. And that's when even the most powerful forces standing against you will have no choice but to stop and listen. And here's what makes authority so unstoppable. When you operate in truth with full conviction, even the ones who don't agree with you can't deny you. That's why the United States was stunned. Not because they suddenly switched sides, not because they fully embraced everything Jaishankar said, but because they couldn't dismiss it. And that's the level you've got to reach in your own life, where even your critics have to acknowledge your presence. They may not like you, they may not clap for you, they may not endorse you, but they cannot ignore you. That's the undeniable factor. When your voice carries weight, people stop pretending you don't exist. They can argue with your perspective, but they cannot argue with your authority. That's the beauty of standing firm. You move from being optional to being essential. And the moment you become essential, the room shifts, the narrative shifts, and even your enemies are forced to adjust to your reality. For too long, the story of India was told through someone else's lens, framed in someone else's narrative, boxed into someone else's version of who it was supposed to be. But when Jaishankar spoke, he shattered that frame. He broke through the limitations others tried to impose and declared a new reality. And isn't that what so many of us need to do? Because the truth is, people will always try to write your script for you. They'll say you're too small, you're too late, you're too weak, you don't belong. And if you let their words define you, you'll end up living inside a cage built by their opinions. But here's what happens when you break that limitation. You stop being a character in their story, and you start becoming the author of your own. That's why his words carried such power. They weren't confined to the old labels. They weren't limited to the old roles. They were fresh, bold, uncontainable. And that's the invitation to you. Stop letting the world put you in a box, because you were never created to fit their labels. You were created to break them. And that's the challenge staring you right in the face. If one man's courage could silence a room full of world powers, what could your courage do in the spaces you've been hiding? Don't tell me it doesn't matter. Don't tell me your voice is too small. Because the truth is, it only takes one spark to ignite a fire, and it only takes one voice to shift an atmosphere. Jaishankar didn't wait for a perfect moment. He created the moment by opening his mouth, and that's what you've got to do. You don't need every resource. You don't need every supporter. You don't need everyone clapping for you. You just need the courage to step up and speak with conviction. Because when you do, people will stop. They will listen. They will feel the weight of your presence. And here's the secret: courage is contagious. The moment you stand, others around you who have been afraid to move will find their strength in your example. That's how change begins, not when everyone moves at once, but when one person decides to be bold enough to move first. So here's where it all comes together. Jaishankar breaking that silence was more than a political moment. It was a blueprint for life. It showed the world that truth spoken with conviction can shift nations, can unsettle powers, can rewrite the narrative. And if his courage could command the attention of the globe, then your courage can command the attention of your world. Stop waiting for permission. Stop waiting for applause. Stop waiting for the perfect time. The time is now. The power is in you. And the voice you've been silencing, is the very thing that will set you free. Because when you speak with authority, when you live without apology, when you stand in your assignment, your presence becomes undeniable. And that, my friend, is how you don't just make history, you create it.